difendersi dalla peste atomica. I resti dell'umanità cercano scampo su di un altro pianeta. Oltre 10.000 comparse, forse 15.000. Voi capite, una tragica folla che abbandona per
Ma
sempre.
va, davvero vedremo tutta questa roba nel tuo film? Mamma mia, il profeta fa la voce grossa, si è messo in testa di far paura a tutti quanti.
One of the cornerstones of Fellini's directorial style was the so-called disponibilità, the willingness to accept unforeseen events that occurred during film production and include them in the film itself, introducing freshness and unpredictability. In the film 8½, during the scene of the visit to the colossal set of the science fiction film that Guido is supposed to direct, he goes aside to talk with his wife's friend. The conversation is interrupted by the arrival of a character called Marinaio, whom Guido asks to perform a little dance. Marinaio asks if the scene will be introduced in the film. Guido reassures him, but then, in front of the character's persistence, rudely dismisses him. Nevertheless, Marinaio's dance is in the film, and we, the audience, see it. This element, like many others in 8½, is accepted even though it is not strictly necessary for the content and form of the film. But what is strictly necessary for a work, we might ask ourselves? What are the extraneous elements, and what are the elements that constitute its core? What are the extraneous and core elements of our daily life, and therefore, if we want to represent this reality, to what extent can we synthesize it and ignore that things happen that we had not foreseen? Things that seem completely foreign to a linear course of events, things that seem absurd in the face of any attempt to explain them. The ability to improvise seems to underlie the entire structure of the film 8½, and as viewers we cannot decide how much of the film is due to the prior writing and how much to the intervention of chance events that were later integrated in the editing and production phases. One of Fellini's great directorial abilities is not letting us see the seams between writing and improvisation, just as he remarkably fluidly shows transitions between various planes of perception, between the imaginary, dream, reality, and memory. Italians, rightly or wrongly, consider themselves masters of the art of improvisation, not necessarily in the artistic field, but more specifically in the field of real life. Italians believe in the art of coping, getting by, and being able to find an unexpected solution in the most improbable situations. Beyond what is believed, the type of creativity most appreciated in Italy is not that of the Renaissance masters, but that of ordinary people who manage to maneuver through the intricacies of rules, laws, and possibilities. An example of this skill is presented in Dino Risi's comedy Big Deal on Madonna Street, where we see a group of amateur criminals attempting a failed bank robbery. In a specific scene, we witness the gang members receiving an impromptu tutorial on cracking a safe from an elderly delinquent, who delivers the instructions to them from a public housing estate balcony amidst hanging laundry. The mix of the amateurs' and professors' incompetence, the alleged seriousness of the intent, and the precarious home situation makes this one of the most hilarious scenes in Italian cinema history. The idea of improvisation, influenced by the great aesthetic achievements of jazz from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, which reached high levels with artists like Coltrane, was also applied in American cinema. In this context, the absence or limited use of a screenplay was employed to enable an almost documentary approach aimed at achieving levels of authenticity that the too rigid language of Hollywood had partially lost at the time. An example is the 1968 film Symbiocytotoxoplasm, where a film crew films itself in the process of making the same film. The idea of a film that describes the making of a film during the production process was probably influenced precisely by 8½. However, in Symbiocytotoxoplasm, we see the film crew members democratically discussing all elements of the film's production, making it significantly different from 8½, which is dominated by the personalities of the director Fellini and his alter ego Guido. To what extent can we accept elements determined by chance in our creative production, and to what extent do we expect them to be arbitrarily decided by our authorship? Am I, as the author, the little king of my creative world, and therefore I decide what can happen and what cannot happen, also derogating from the rules I have set for myself? Or can I use techniques to limit this decision-making capacity and ensure that chance elements come into play independently of my will? This is precisely the problem of the difference between using improvisation and using chance in creative processes. In the visual arts, for instance, in the works of the pop art movement, unconventional and in some way accidental elements were introduced using materials from mass culture within the artwork. We can see these creative processes in the works of Robert Rauschenberg, where pictorial elements, ready-made objects, and images cut out from newspapers are combined with brushstrokes, drawings, and sculptural elements in a mix of intentionality and openness to chance. The question is that every art that aims to describe reality must ask itself what reality is. Reality is probably not made up of narrative linearity. It is not made up of logic. It is not guided by a single will, that of an author. In reality, images, feelings, and words accumulate in an often indistinguishable way, as in the works of Robert Rauschenberg, and only afterwards can we perhaps find meaning. Starting from the new Hollywood movement of the 1960s, the intention to adhere to reality has never left a part of American cinema. An example close to us is Sean Baker's Florida Project, which follows the adventures of a group of children in a desolate motel near a Disney amusement park. The contrast between the child world and the imaginary world of American entertainment, which we only see in the background, becomes an obvious metaphor for the American dream. On the other hand, the child's perspective has always been a protagonist in every need to get closer to reality, as happened in Italian neo-realist cinema, to symbolize a pure gaze free from ideological structures. Here, children are omnipresent starting from De Sica's film The Children Are Watching Us. De Sica, in 1946, right after the war, produced Shoeshine, a film that follows the adventures of two children, their desires, and their tragedy. Their goal, far from adults' expectations, is simply to possess a horse with which to walk the streets of the city. Is this goal worthy of being considered a life program, or is it simply a way to enjoy their childhood existence and what happens in the moment when it happens? This theme is also used in the American film Little Fugitive from 1953, which follows a child's escape in the city and his experience in an amusement park, where he wanders aimlessly and lets us see the world through his curious eyes. The life of the two children in Shoeshine is not too dissimilar from that of the horse they aspire to possess, a life decided by others, dominated by rules they do not know or do not understand. Their attempt to live freely will end up in the meshes of adult social rules and lead to tragedy. The metaphor of animal life is fully embraced in Bresson's film Auhasard Balthazar, where the life of a donkey, completely subjugated to human decisions, makes him a tragic character. The availability as an aesthetic style provided by Fellini is here nothing more than an inevitable acceptance of the tragedy of living. The idea of improvisation also involves a non-permanent concept of time, a fluid concept of temporality that we can see in the works of Irvin Worm's one-minute sculptures, where a person instructed by the artist interacts in an unusual way with everyday objects for the short duration of 1 minute. Just like in jazz improvisation, many events are difficult to fix in time, to reproduce, to transcribe, and they happen only once, and this ephemeral character is a part of their existence. Probably the most influential artist of the 20th century regarding the concept of chance and improvisation was John Cage, who took these ideas to the most extreme consequences, with works such as Imaginary Landscape, where performers must, under the guidance of a conductor, move the tuning knobs of some radios, obviously without knowing what type of sound they will find each time. The openness to chance offers the possibility of escaping from predetermined meanings that often hinder our creativity. Or it can offer the possibility to destroy predictions and plans made about life, opening up to a completely unforeseen dimension and a crisis situation that changes everything, as seen in Martin Scorsese's film After Hours. The yuppie's life is thrown into disarray by various characters who belong to the creative underworld of New York. The film upsets narrative linearity and even the coherence and continuity of the protagonist's character, who serves as the point of cohesion of the film, are called into question. The character finds himself in a labyrinth of chance events that challenge his knowledge and representations of the world. He is completely passive in this journey, but we can imagine that this crisis he faces represents a possibility for liberation. In fact, when we lose control over the events of our existence, whether it is due to our voluntary renunciation or due to impossibility, the first sensation that overwhelms us is anxiety, a feeling experienced by the characters in both Fellini's 8.5 and Scorsese's After Hours. But isn't this sensation of anxiety precisely what anyone who embarks on a creative process must face when faced with a blank page? The ability to confront this anxiety is an indispensable characteristic for every creative person.
1. Coup. 2. D. Jamais.
At the end of the 19th century, in what is perhaps his masterpiece, Stefan Mallarme claimed that a throw of the dice will never abolish chance. This enigmatic statement helps us to conclude our journey, once again questioning the relationship between creativity, chance, improvisation, and reality, and asking ourselves, how much control are we willing to give up in the production of our creative work?
Blanchi, étale, furieux, sous une inclinaison plane.